First, I need to say that in preparing for today's Earth Sunday service, I knew that I wanted the ocean to be my focus, but that's a pretty vast subject. So I want to credit a fellow clergywoman, Kimberly Buchanan, for showing a way to approach the subject. So today's sermon is closely patterned after a way that I heard it presented, and it was meaningful to me, so I hope it will be for you. In today's passage, Job was suffering. He'd lost his livelihood, he'd lost his children, he lost his health, he had lost everything. His wife's counsel in the face of these losses was very simple. She said, "Curse God and die." That was her advice. Nice. But Job wouldn't do that. Instead, he opted to stay donned in his garb of sackcloth and ashes and to ponder the question, why? Why do the innocent suffer? Why me? As he tries to figure out why God is treating him in this manner in which he's not accustomed, his friends try to help. First, they just sit with him in silence, which is okay. But then they do the unappreciated. They open their mouths. And this is what they say. Tragedy doesn't happen unless someone sins. So we can only conclude, Job, that you sinned. Job listens as they explain to him that because bad things only happen to bad people, that means that he himself is bad. But finally, when he can't stand to listen to any more, Job cries out, "Give me a break. I absolutely and positively know that I have done nothing to deserve this." And then he looks up at heaven and says the same thing to God. I have done nothing to deserve this. The book of Job consists of 37 chapters worth of Job's ranting and of his friends consoling. And then finally, when you think you can't read another word, in chapter 38, God breaks his silence. And now, instead of giving answers, God interjects with questions of his own. Who are you to question me? Were you there when I formed the earth? Did you set the boundaries for the oceans? Have you walked in the recesses of the deep? And bottom line, God's inference is, if you can't understand something as basic as my creation, how in the world do you think you can comprehend the meaning of suffering? Buchanan states God's rationale like this: the only way to understand suffering is to understand creation, and the only way to understand creation is to have created it. There's no way that you will ever understand it or suffering. Well, at last, Job is humbled. He reaches the point where now, because he can conceptualize the fact he does not know, now he can see his own smallness. And his eyes at this point can finally open to God's greatness. And then he says these immortal words, I have uttered what I did not understand, things too wonderful for me, which I did not know. I had heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eyes see you. And thus endeth the lesson. But now, supposing we fast forward 2,500 years and today ask the same questions that Job did. Imagine that we too have experienced something tragic and we have asked God why. Why am I suffering like this? And imagine that God answers us the same way that he did Job. So if God asks us, who determined the earth's measurements? Surely you know. We can respond, yes. In fact, we do know. It's right in Wikipedia. The first person to measure the circumference of the earth was the Greek scientist Eratosthenes in the 3rd century BC. He measured the circumference at 5,000 stadia, or stadium length, and that translates to roughly 24,860 miles. Then, if God asks another question, have you entered into the springs of the sea or walked in the recesses of the deep? To that we can answer, positive. On January 23rd, 1960, Jacques Picard and Don Walsh descended to the very deepest part of the ocean, 36,070 feet below the surface. Then, more recently, James Cameron made a solo manned descent on March 26, 2012, slightly more than 3 years ago. But then suppose God continues interrogating and asks us, where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? And we respond by saying, well, we weren't actually present, but we know all about the Big Bang Theory, and that should answer your questions. But it doesn't. This reminds me of that classic story about the conversation between God and the scientist. God is sitting in heaven when a scientist approached him and says, Lord, just so you know, we don't need you anymore. Science has figured out a way to create life out of nothing, and now we can do what you did at the beginning of time. Oh, says God, is that so? Tell me how you go about doing that. Well, explains the scientist, we take dirt and form it into a likeness of someone, and then we breathe life into it, and voila, we've created a real live human being. The scientist rubs his knuckles on his shirt, and God says, that's very interesting. Show me how you go about doing that. So the scientist starts by bending down to the earth and molding the soil. Oh, no, interrupts God. You find your own dirt. I'm wondering if God would end the discussion right there with a joke like that. Well, maybe, since we initially asked about suffering, God might take a different approach. Maybe God would sit with us a while and then possibly say to us, you know, I understand that you're suffering, but maybe you need to think about the fact that my creation, the earth and the oceans, are suffering as well. You want to feel better, I know, but remember that my creation does too. You see, you and my creation are kin. And every breath you take and every drop you drink depends on the ocean. You need each other. And now her well-being depends on you. Consider what the oceans are having to endure. Acidity is increasing and threatening the life in it. And as the acid levels rise, so do noise levels. Noise pollution is forcing the whales to dive deeper who are dying for quiet. Sea turtles are devouring plastic bags, mistaking them for jellyfish. And the bags then get caught in their digestive tracts and kill them. And some marine life are finding water bottle caps and unwittingly feeding them to their babies, not realizing until it's too late that the babies can't digest them and will die. All around the world, we know that we dump garbage, lethal industrial waste, and pollutants from underwater mining. And we are slowly but ever so painfully learning the consequences. It used to be that we could blithely use the ocean as our grand disposal because we tell ourselves that trash we couldn't see wouldn't hurt us. But now we know so much better, and we can't pretend otherwise. Yet in the words of oceanographer Sylvia Earle, just as we have the power to harm the ocean, we still have the power to put in place policies and to modify our own behavior in ways that would be an insurance policy for the future. But, she reminds us, it's later than we think. The time to act is now. There is still time to pull the seeds back from the brink. There is still time to save the marine life. But, she says, the time is now. The time is now. At this time, normally I would offer a prayer, and I'm going to today, but I would invite you to join me, and as you look at the picture, we will pray to the sound of the sea. Hear our prayers, O Lord. Amen.